Chapter 6, the rules of Proto-Hebrew, rules of syllables, and notes on Hebrew syntax. This chapter is a most important chapter in the book. It is very important. It is really the basis of all the rules of phonology that we're going to use in order to build forms in the language. And so mastery of this chapter is obviously very important. The first thing in section 2 of chapter 6 is the rules of Proto-Hebrew. Now, of course, we have Biblical Hebrew, but we also have, let's say, a language before that period, before Biblical Hebrew. We call that Proto-Hebrew. And indeed, it is somewhat theoretical, but at the same time, I think very correct. And just a little knowledge of Proto-Hebrew can be very helpful in eliminating a lot of memorization down the road in Biblical Hebrew. And so that's why I'm going to teach you some of the rules of Proto-Hebrew in order for this to help you in Biblical Hebrew and to cut out a lot of memorization. So I know this seems, at the beginning, it seems very theoretical. Why are we learning this? But hang on with me, and I'll promise you that it'll come in very handy as we do many more chapters after this. So the first thing we want to do is look at rules of Proto-Hebrew or pre-Biblical Hebrew. The first rule is this, that if you see kamets in Hebrew, and we have here a word davar that has two kamets, if or kametzes, and if you see a kametz, what you want to do immediately in your mind is really see those kametzes as going back to patachs. So when you see a kametz in Biblical Hebrew, when you go back to Proto-Hebrew or pre-Biblical Hebrew, really the kametz goes back to a patach. So that's very important that you know that. Number two, when you see a vocal schwa in Biblical Hebrew, that goes back to a short vowel, and most frequently patach. Now, it's not always patach, and you can see in the first footnote that I mentioned how some other things there you might want to look at, like a sereh and a hirik, how they go together. Holam and kametz chatuf or kibbutz, they go together. But usually, when you see a vocal schwa, now yes, it can go back to a hirik. Yes, it can go back to a, let's say, a kametz chatuf. But usually, when you see a vocal schwa, it goes back to a short vowel, and normally that vowel is a patach. So you want to keep that in mind. Now, a silent schwa. If you do see a silent schwa in Hebrew, it's the same in Proto-Hebrew. Silent schwa is nothing in Biblical Hebrew, and it's nothing in Proto-Hebrew. So don't worry about silent schwa. Only worry about vocal schwa. Number three, historic long vowels are the same in Proto-Hebrew as it is in Biblical Hebrew. So if you see a word like sus, this would be a historic long vowel here, the shurik. And so this form would look identical whether it's in Biblical Hebrew or it's in Proto-Hebrew. So again, remember, historic long vowels, they never change, and that's really nice. Next, if you have short vowels, and by that we're talking about patach, hirik, kibbutz, and kametz chatuf, in Biblical Hebrew, if you see a short vowel in Biblical Hebrew, they are again the same in Proto-Hebrew. And so you have a little word like gam, and this is Biblical Hebrew, and you see a short vowel. Well, that means that in Proto-Hebrew, this vowel is exactly the same. It was a batach, and so they're the same. So those are the four rules of Proto-Hebrew, and that's what you need to know. And by knowing those, it's going to aid you in what's called the 5 rules of syllable in Biblical Hebrew. You must know these 5 rules. They're the 5 rules that we're going to do all the time in this class. And so section 3, or in this grammar, section 3, very, very important. You really have to get this down. And the way I have it listed here is I draw or write out 3 words. So let me see here. I have 3 words. Looks something like this. We have davar, and this time I put an accent on it. And then I draw a number like 1 and 2. And then there's another word. I'll tell you what, we'll just do one word at a time. That might be easier. Let's just do one word at a time. The first word is davar. And this time, like I said, we're going to put an accent. And this was going to be syllable 1, syllable 2. We'll go ahead and divide the syllable. And here are the rules. In a closed, accented syllable, Hebrew, and notice the word I use here, prefers. If you notice the next one, I say requires. Requires means there's very few exceptions. Prefers means that this is very common, but there are more exceptions than what you would see when I use the word require. So, in a closed, accented syllable, Hebrew prefers a long vowel, and there's your long vowel. Remember, these patachs, as we've just talked about, these patachs really go back, those kametzes go back to patachs. So in a closed, accented syllable, Hebrew prefers long, you're going to get lengthening from the proto vowel. Rule number 2, in an open pretonic syllable, Hebrew requires a long vowel, and so the original vowel will go from a patach to a long kametz. And so there's our word davar. Okay, the next word is melech. This is rule 3, this is rule 4. Here we have a closed, ends in this consonant, closed unaccented, the accent's over here, closed unaccented syllable. Hebrew requires a short vowel, and that's what you see here. And then rule 4 is, in an accented open syllable, Hebrew prefers a short vowel, and that's what you get here. So there's rules 3 and 4. Rule 5 looks like this. Here's a division, and I'm going to put a semi-division here. As you know, this is a vocal schwa. This has to attach. But for right now, let's put a semi-division here. What we have here is we have the accent on this syllable. This is closed, accented Hebrew, prefers long vowel. That's what you get. Here with the bait, what we have is a pretonic open syllable. Hebrew requires a long vowel. That's what you see. And originally, this is a vocal schwa. Originally, of course, we had a patach here. That's why I wanted to sort of divide here. And so what we have here is in an originally, in Proto-Hebrew is what I mean by original, in an original, open, pro-pretonic syllable, pretonic, pro-pretonic, Hebrew requires requires a vocal schwa. And so we're going to get reduction here. We're going to reduce short vowel into a vocal schwa. And of course, once we do that, then we can get rid of the dotted line here because this is going to attach. But this is, in fact, rule number 5. Let me just bring that dotted line back. This is rule 5. In an originally open, pro-pretonic syllable that's got a short vowel, you're going to reduce that short vowel to a vocal schwa, and there you go. So there are the 5 rules. If you turn now to section 4 of chapter 6, I go through those rules again, restoring them to their proto-forms, except for number 2, melech. We'll do the proto-form of that another time. And for davar, really I've already done it, but you see a word like davar, and you have these kametz. And again, one of the first rules, I think the first rule for Proto-Hebrew is, if you see kametz, you know in Proto-world they go back to patachs. And so what you do is now you basically do the rules. This is a closed, accented syllable. Hebrew prefers long. This syllable, in an open, pretonic position, requires long, and that explains that. Again, for melech, I can't explain that form to you yet. When we get to chapter 15, I'll discuss at that time the Proto-Hebrew behind the word melech. But for now, it'd be better that we not do that. But again, just notice rules 3 and 4, as you see there, number 2. And then really, I've already explained this one also, davarim. But let's just do it one more time. This is a very important, this is what you see in Hebrew. Very important principle. To end here, we've got a historic long vowel. Well, that's going to be the same way in Biblical Hebrew or Proto-Hebrew, so we're not going to change that at all. When you see kametz, you take it back to patach. When you see vocal schwa, for now, in all situations, take it back to patach for right now. Okay, here's what you have. Again, this is closed accented. Hebrew prefers a long vowel, and there it has it. Of course, it being a historic long vowel, you couldn't change it no matter what. That would override anything. And so that is rule number 1 of your 5 rules. Here, we have pre-tonic open. And Hebrew requires a long vowel, so we're going to lengthen the short patach to a long kametz. And now we have an original pre-tonic open syllable with a short vowel. You know what that means. That means reduction. And once we do that, we've got to get rid of this line because that's no longer a syllable, and now we get davarim. The reason that's causing this reduction is rapid speech and also a strong accent. When a language develops a strong accent, usually vowels will be reduced. Whereas languages that do not have a strong accent, a lot of your Oriental languages and even Arabic, without a strong accent, normally you preserve all vowels. But Hebrew began to have a strong accent, and that's what helps slur some of these vowels. English is famous for this, and so is other languages like Aramaic. All right, now we want to go to section 5. Notes on Hebrew syntax. And I'm giving you the basic sentence structure of Hebrew. The usual word order in Hebrew is the verb comes first, then the subject, and then if you have an object, you'd have the object next. And so as I say here, the usual order is verb, subject, object. And that's the normal way of doing things. If you change that order, if you say subject, then go to verb, and then go to object, normally what you're doing is giving great emphasis to the subject. So you can see the examples I give you. Shema Moshe Kol. There the verb is first, Shema. And it literally is he heard, but then you get the subject after that, Moses. So Moses, he heard. We would simply say Moses heard. A voice. But if you change that word order and say Moshe, and then say Shema Kol, then you would, that's more emphasis. It is Moses that heard a voice. And again, you could put the object first, and that would give greater emphasis to the object. A voice, Moses heard. So again, you watch for that varying word order, but normally you get verb, subject, and then object, with the emphasis being more on the verb then. For third person verbs, whether singular, which would be, he, she, it, or plural, that is they have either an inherent pronoun, as I describe it here, or an implied pronoun. So, like with the example we gave, Shema, there's implied here in this verb, he. But if you get the he explicitly given to you, like Moses, then you forget saying he. You don't say he heard Moses, or something like that, or he, namely Moses, heard. We don't do that. We'll just say Moses heard. But suppose Moses is not there. Then it's simply he heard, and then, of course, who the antecedent of he is would have to be determined by context. And it's the same with the plural form. If you get a plural form in the third person, you'd get the same thing, and we'll talk more about those later on. But in the third person, you can say they, and then if you have that subject, it'd be the same thing. You can say, Moses and Aaron heard, but same thing. And in number 2, I talk about disjunctive accents. In the Hebrew Bible, not only did the Masoretes, who are the people who are the preservers of the traditional pronunciation of the text and the creators of the vowel signs that you see in your Hebrew Bibles today, they also, not only do they preserve this sort of the traditional pronunciation of the text, the vowels and so forth, but they are also preservers of the traditional chanting of the text. And in the chanting of the text, they have these accent marks. And these accent marks can be very important for purposes of exegesis, syntax, and so forth. So in my grammar, there is going to be an emphasis on these things because ultimately they can be a great aid in grouping words together and in syntax, putting words together in a language, any type of thing that the text gives us to group the words, like punctuation and so forth, very helpful. And in some ways, there's an analogy between modern punctuation and the Masoretic accents that we have in the Bible. And so the first ones that we want to teach you is the sof pasuk, which always goes with saluk, and then the athnach. The sof pasuk are two diamond marks. They're stacked like this. They occur at the end of a sentence. And they'll always have a saluk. The saluk will be a vertical line. And you see that, you think metheg, because we've had that same sign for metheg. But metheg does not occur where the main accent is on a word. Saluk does. Saluk will always be on the accented syllable. So usually it's on the last syllable or the next to last syllable is where you'll see saluk. And it always goes with the sof pasuk, so it's easy to distinguish from metheg, which is usually not on the main accent of a word, and they do not have the sof pasuk following it. So again, they're easy to distinguish. And again, that would be your indication of you've come to the end of a sentence. Okay? Now, the second one is the athnach. The athnach is a symbol that looks more like this. And the athnach divides a sentence into halves. So I'm going to write these boxes. And this time the boxes do not refer to letters. They refer to words. And so let's say this is a sentence in Biblical Hebrew. So we got a sentence of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. It would end with the sof pasuk. The final word on the accent would also have the saluk. But then the major break in the sentence is going to have an athnach. And again, that athnach can be extremely important in its placement. And so basically, when you do that, it's like putting a big line here, a big wall. So when I'm grouping these words, I want to group these two words together, and then I'll group these three. Now, ultimately, on the sentence level, we're grouping all of these together on the sentence level. But within the sentence, these two I'm going to put together, and then these three I'm going to put together. And again, it's the grouping of words that can be very difficult for students when they're grouping words together for translating. And so this athnach is a great aid to you to group words. Okay? So very important. And the athnach will also always occur on the accented syllable of the word on which it occurs. And so if we have, like let's say again this is a word, and you have the athnach, this syllable that it's hitting is the accented syllable. So again, very important. And if you look at footnote 8 there, I give you some of the information about why it's important exegetically. A lot of times in Hebrew, the first half of the verse is really the main idea, with the second half of the verse, as I say here, either explaining, specifying, enumerating, or qualifying the first half of a verse. This is not to say that the emphasis is always here. You can have emphasis anywhere in the verse. But the first half of the verse, marked off by this athnach, again, is usually the main idea, the second half qualifying it in some way. So again, very important. And sometimes this athnach can give you emphasis within a verse. It can hit the most, it's almost like touching the nerve of the verse, the most important part. And I give you a couple of verses to look up. And there you'll see, in those situations, they put the athnach right where the real nerve, right where the real emphasis of the verse is. And so again, this is a very important indicator to you for exegesis and for grouping of syntax. Finally, we have something called pausal forms. When you have a saluk and when you have an athnach, these accents often create what is called a pausal form. A pausal form is a form that, to the mind of the speaker or reader of Biblical Hebrew, would be a pause like we would have after a punctuation mark. It's sort of like a comma. We are supposed to, when we read a text and we hit a comma, we have to delay there, or a semicolon or something like this. Well, the way they mark a pause in their language is oftentimes by lengthening a short vowel into a long vowel. That would be an indication to them of a pause. So suppose you have a word, as I give you, like the word mayim. This is the way the word normally looks. And again, the accent, I'll indicate the accent this time by the suluk. And here's the sof pasuk that goes with it. The suluk here is going to generate a pausal form. And what they'll do is they'll take the short vowel and they'll lengthen it to a long vowel. And this lengthening of a long vowel, which originally in Hebrew, probably what they did is what they do in Arabic today. They would say it longer. It wouldn't be a difference in sound. It wouldn't be something like ah and ah, a difference in sound. But you're holding it in your mouth longer. When you had the patach like this, it was just ma. But when they did this, it was ma, you see, so mayim. And they would lengthen that, and that lengthening of that short vowel was an indication to them we have a pausal form here. And the same would happen if we had an ethnach. Of course, you wouldn't have the sof pasuk there. But the same thing with an ethnach. It lengthens short vowels. And when you lengthen a short vowel, that's often an indication of a pausal form. Now, if this vowel had already been long, you can still, you have that pausal form, and you'll have either the ethnach or the suluk there. But again, they would regard that as a pausal form. So again, make sure that you understand what a pausal form is. Now it's time for you to do exercise 6.